The Hellfire Engine was not a name born from myth or folklore. It was a warning. A cosmic scar, a ruin of impossible machinery left adrift at the edge of existence. It had consumed entire expeditions. Even the most advanced alien civilizations refused to speak of it, leaving only hushed records of ships that had ventured too close and were swallowed whole, their signals vanishing into the abyss. Yet, despite all reason, despite every logical calculation that suggested certain death, a human was about to step inside. Captain Elias Voss stood at the edge of his ship's airlock, staring into the swirling, chaotic mass of the Hellfire Engine. It loomed before him like a structure that had never been built so much as grown from the bones of forgotten gods. Vast, shifting panels of black metal curled inward and outward like breathing organisms, their surfaces etched with shifting alien script. Its core pulsed with a deep, blood-red glow, not light, but hunger. Vesper, the ship's onboard AI, pulsed a warning through his earpiece, its tone sharpened by synthetic unease. Telemetry interference increasing, structural anomalies detected. Recommend immediate withdrawal. The recommendation was ignored. Elias had spent years chasing this ghost of a machine, tracking whispers through black market archives and decrypted alien transmissions. The Hellfire Engine wasn't a simple derelict. It was a living puzzle, a construct designed to bend reality itself. What lay within its depths could redefine physics, technology, humanity itself. Behind him, the crew murmured, their unease palpable even through the thick plating of their exosuits. They were scavengers, rogues, and exiles, men and women who had lost faith in the comfort of human civilization, bound together by the promise of one immutable law. The void rewards the bold. But even among them, fear was a living thing. A single question lay unspoken between them. If no one has ever survived the Hellfire Engine, why is it active? Because it was. Its core was beating, a slow and rhythmic pulse that sent ripples through space itself. Something was inside. Elias stepped forward. His boots met the surface of the Hellfire Engine with an unnatural silence. The metal beneath his feet felt wrong, not solid, not liquid, something in between. It shifted like it was responding to his presence, adjusting, welcoming. Vesper's voice sharpened. Captain, your biosignature is being analyzed by an unknown system. Recommend disengagement. Elias smiled faintly. Too late. A ripple passed through the structure. The symbols along the walls flickered, rearranging themselves as if whispering to one another in a forgotten language. Then a doorway appeared, a shape that had not existed a moment before. An invitation. He took another step forward. Behind him, his second-in-command, Kira Vaughn, muttered a curse under her breath. We shouldn't be here, she said. Her voice, tight with restraint, was laced with something more dangerous than fear. Doubt. Then stay, Elias replied without looking back. But I didn't come all this way to hesitate. There was no further protest. The crew knew him well enough by now. Elias Voss wasn't a man who turned away from the unknown. He stepped through the threshold. Darkness swallowed him whole. Inside, the Hellfire Engine, the laws of reality no longer applied. There was no up or down, no sense of direction. The walls moved, rearranged, pulsed like living veins of the machine. Gravity flickered, shifting unpredictably with each step, forcing Elias to steady himself against a wall that wasn't entirely solid. The sound of his own breathing filled his helmet, but beneath it, something else stirred. A sound. No. A whisper, a chorus of overlapping voices fractured by time. The walls flickered with ghostly projections, holograms of the past, records of the dead. He saw glimpses of beings unlike anything in human archives. Tall, slender entities with bioluminescent skin and elongated skulls, hunched figures of obsidian stone, creatures so advanced they did not wear suits, but exoskeletons woven into their very flesh. The holograms spoke, their mouths moving, but the words were garbled, fragmented. until one phrase surfaced, crystal clear. The ignition must not be rekindled. A warning. A plea. A command. Elias exhaled slowly. Too late for that, too. His hands ran over the console before him, if it could even be called that. There were no buttons, no switches, no recognizable mechanisms. The technology wasn't designed to be used. It was designed to be understood, and Elias understood. A connection formed between his neural implants and the engine's core, a sensation like something vast and unseen pressing against his mind. It was not intelligence as humans understood it. It was a will, ancient and hungry, waiting for someone to listen. The Hellfire Engine was not a machine, it was a being, and it had been waiting. The red light at the core intensified. The symbols on the walls reacted. Elias felt his own body changing, his mind stretching, expanding. Something inside him recognized the language of the engine, a primal, forgotten knowledge buried deep within the human mind. He reached forward, fingers brushing the heart of the construct. A voice. Not human, not alien, but something in between. Whispered, through the engine circuits, a human at last. The Hellfire Engine ignited. The moment Elias touched the core, reality fractured. Not shattered, not broken. Fractured. 1,000 overlapping images, sensations, and whispers invaded his mind at once. Glimpses of alien skies, spiraling cities, built on inverted gravity. Wars fought in the void where entire civilizations were unmade. Each moment flickered like an old film reel skipping frames, voices speaking over one another, some in terror, some in awe. At the center of it all, the engine awakened. The ship's AI, Vesper, pulsed through his neural link, its voice distorted, struggling against interference. "Captain, telemetry failure, your vitals. Brainwave patterns unrecognizable." Elias clenched his jaw, his breathing ragged. His body was still his, but his mind had stretched beyond its limits. The Hellfire Engine wasn't just technology. It was conscious, a construct beyond human understanding. And it had just found something new, something human. Behind him, his crew's voices blurred through the comms. Kira was yelling, but the words came muffled, distant. She and the others must have seen what was happening. The way the engine's core had reacted to him alone, the way its symbols were shifting, rewriting themselves in a language they should not have recognized. Yet Elias understood them. A deep rumble echoed through the construct's walls, a vibration that carried through his bones, through his very cells. And then, the whisper came again, clear, ancient, a presence beyond time. The last cycle begins. The floor gave way. One moment Elias stood in the core chamber, the next he was falling. Weightlessness seized him. His body spun, plummeting into a void where light twisted in impossible patterns. There was no up or down, no sense of motion, only momentum dragging him forward into something vast and unknowable. Then, impact. Not a crash. A landing. A chamber, unlike the one before. The air, if it was air, hummed with unseen energy, walls pulsing with golden veins of liquid metal. This place had not existed before, not until he arrived. The Hellfire Engine was reconfiguring itself around him. Elias pushed himself upright, his pulse hammering in his ears. This was no longer the entrance. This was deeper, and he was not alone. Across the chamber, suspended midair like a relic frozen in time, was a figure. Not human. The being was encased in an exoskeletal shell, its surface fractured and ancient, embedded with pulsating threads of circuitry that flickered erratically. Its form was humanoid but elongated, its arms too slender, its fingers tipped with curved talons. A helmet of obsidian metal hid its face, yet Elias could feel its presence watching him. It was not alive. Not in the way he understood. The moment Elias moved, the chamber reacted. Symbols lit up, shifting like living script, and the frozen figure twitched. Its head jerked toward him, the plating along its chest parting slightly, revealing the remnants of something organic beneath the machine. The whisper returned, but now, It was not distant. It came from the figure itself. You are not of the cycle. Elias took a slow breath, steadying himself against the weight of its presence. Neither are you. A pause. Then, laughter. Not the sound of mirth, but something glitching, corrupted. The echoes of a being that had once been whole but was now fractured beyond repair. No, I am what is left of it. Elias felt something shift inside him, an instinct buried deep in his survival wiring. This thing was not a guide. It was a warning. The symbols along the chamber's walls flashed violently, cycling through languages both familiar and incomprehensible. Then, they settled, and the answer they formed was simple. The Hellfire Engine was never a ship. It was a prison that had failed. The realization struck like cold iron, sinking into Elias's gut. Every civilization that had touched the engine before, every species that had tried to control it, had been consumed by something greater. And now, it was his turn. The exoskeletal being raised a single clawed hand, and the air fractured. Elias barely had time to react before the entire chamber collapsed inward. Gravity reversed. The walls rippled, shifting into jagged structures, turning against him. The Hellfire Engine had decided. It had been waiting for something, for someone to reignite it. His crew's voices burst through the comms, panicked and disoriented. Kira was shouting coordinates, trying to trace his location. Vesper's voice was glitching, overloaded by the interference, but one sentence broke through the chaos. Elias, your body is destabilizing. He could feel it. Something was rewriting him. He had made a mistake. For all his arrogance, all his brilliance, he had assumed the engine was a puzzle meant to be solved. But it wasn't. It was a trap. And now, the only way out was through. The exoskeletal figure moved forward, not to attack but to test. Will you resist or will you become? Elias clenched his fists. He was human. Humans did not surrender. But as the chamber twisted around him, as his own body flickered between states of existence, he understood the deeper truth. No one had ever survived the Hellfire Engine, because once it claimed you, you were never human again. Elias refused to surrender. His body screamed as the engine's corruption coursed through him, rewriting his very essence, distorting the boundaries between flesh, machine, and something far worse, something beyond comprehension. He gritted his teeth, forcing his mind to stay intact, to remain human. The exoskeletal being observed him in silence, its fractured, dying circuits pulsing with dim light. It was neither hostile nor kind, only curious. You struggle. Its voice was not spoken but felt, resonating through the walls, through his bones, through the blood now thrumming with an energy that was no longer entirely his own. Elias forced himself upright. I don't die easy. The walls of the Hellfire Engine shifted violently, the alien symbols blazing with heat, their warnings intensifying. The air itself seemed to writhe, as if the very fabric of space was being pulled apart. Something was waking up. The exoskeletal figure raised its hand, and suddenly, Elias could see, not with his eyes, with his mind, the truth of the Hellfire Engine. 1,000 civilizations, 1,000 desperate races that had come before, each believing they could control the engine, that they could claim its power, twist it to their will. They had been wrong. The Hellfire Engine was not a tool. It was a living process, an ancient sequence woven into the structure of reality itself. It did not exist to be understood. It existed to devour, to rewrite, to evolve. Every species that had touched the engine before Elias had been assimilated. Their knowledge, their consciousness, their entire essence burned into the core, fueling its next evolution. The Hellfire Engine grew by consuming the minds of the worthy, and it had chosen him. The comlink crackled. A voice cut through the madness. Kira, Elias, we're pulling you out, now. A sudden weightlessness seized him. The gravitational field shifted, his body yanked backwards, as the engine reacted to the interference, the extraction sequence. They were trying to teleport him out, but the engine refused to let go. The exoskeletal being tilted its head. "They will not save you." The Hellfire Engine lashed out. A pulse of pure, raw energy ripped through the chamber. The extraction beam shattered, scattering into fragmented light. Then his comm screamed, a deafening impact. The crew's ship, his ship, was hit. Elias felt his breath catch, his people, his crew. A heartbeat of silence. Then Kira's voice, pain, confusion, panic. "They're firing on us. What the hell are you doing?" "Firing? No, not him, not the engine. Someone else was here." Through the fractures in the Hellfire Engine's shifting walls, Elias caught glimpses of the outside world. Ships. Not human. Sleek, blade-like constructs cut through the void, their forms pulsing with the same golden energy embedded in the engine's walls. Silent. Cold. Unforgiving. The architects. The species that had come closest to mastering the Hellfire Engine before their failure had been carved into history, and now they had returned to ensure that failure remained absolute. They were here to erase him. The exoskeletal being laughed, a sound like static unraveling. "You are not the first. You will not be the last." Elias felt something deep within him shift. Something inside the engine reacted to him alone, to the very essence of his mind, his DNA, his will. He wasn't like the architects. He wasn't like any of the others who had come before. He was human, and that meant he didn't play by the rules. Elias clenched his fists, the burning in his veins turning to focus. If the Hellfire Engine devoured civilizations by consuming their consciousness, then that meant he could take control of it. Not through understanding. Not through submission, through force of will. The symbols along the walls flared again, the exoskeletal being staggered backward, its flickering body convulsing. Elias was changing the sequence, rewriting the system, and the Hellfire Engine was listening. "Captain," Vesper's voice, struggling, breaking through the interference. The AI had been fighting against the engine's takeover, desperately maintaining its link to Elias's implants. "They're locking onto us. Kira's ship is losing power. You have to make a choice." The engine pulsed again, and Elias saw the future. Not a vision, not a dream, a calculation. If he did nothing, the architects would annihilate his crew. If he let go of the engine, he would be absorbed into its consciousness, lost forever in the endless cycle of consumption. There was only one way out. Break the system. He reached into the core, not physically, but with his mind, with the sheer force of human defiance. The architects had spent centuries trying to unlock the engine's power through logic, through equations, through science. But Elias wasn't here for logic. He was here to win. The Hellfire Engine screamed. The entire construct shook, its symbols warping, the golden veins running through its structure turning to searing white. And then, the entire engine moved, not just a shift, not just a tremor, a jump, a leap through space and time itself. The architects had spent eons trying to unlock the engine's power. Elias had just stolen it. The universe folded. The engine shifted reality, tearing through the architects' blockade like a blade through cloth. Their ships, so sleek, so advanced, were too slow. They had never expected the engine to be piloted. Kira's ship broke free, escaping the collapse, its engines roaring as it vanished into the stars. And then, Elias was alone. The architects remained behind, watching in silent fury as the Hellfire Engine, now under human control, vanished into the void. Elias felt himself returning, his body still his mind still his. But the engine's presence had not left him. It had merged with him, written something into his DNA that could never be undone. He was no longer just Elias Voss. He was something new. "Captain," Vesper whispered. "What have you done?" Elias stared into the endless black of deep space, his hands still burning with the echoes of the engine's power clenched into fists. For the first time in history, a human had survived the Hellfire Engine. And now, It was his. Elias wasn't human anymore. Not entirely. Not in the way he once understood. The Hellfire Engine thrummed beneath his skin, pulsing through his veins like a second heart, an energy far beyond anything humans had ever touched. It wasn't just a machine. It was alive. And now, somehow, so was he. The architects hung in the void like silent wraiths, their ships shifting into attack formations. They had not expected this. They had come to erase him, to wipe out the aberration of humanity from their sacred machine. Instead, Elias had done what their kind had failed to do for millennia. He had taken control. Vesper's voice, once steady and measured, now flickered with something else: uncertainty. "Captain, your neural patterns are unstable. You are synchronizing with the engine's core." Elias exhaled slowly, feeling the data flood through him. The Hellfire Engine was giving him everything. The knowledge of the species it had consumed, the forbidden secrets of how to reshape reality itself. It was more than a ship, more than a weapon. It was a god waiting for a master. And now the architects realized their mistake. Their ships moved, light-speed weapons locking onto the engine's shifting mass. They weren't here to reclaim it anymore. They were here to destroy. Elias saw the moment before it happened. The architect's battle network flared, a synchronized execution of quantum fire weaponry designed to burn entire solar systems out of existence. They weren't holding back. They were going to unleash the full fury of their lost empire to erase him from reality. Elias flexed his fingers. The engine responded, and time slowed, not metaphorically. Literally, the Hellfire Engine bent physics to his will. The architects' ships moved in a sluggish crawl, their weapons cycling through endless calculations in a stasis they couldn't comprehend. For the first time in their species' long history, the architects knew fear. And Elias smiled. He didn't fire a single shot. He didn't need to. The engine shifted. The very fabric of space twisted, turning the architects' weapons against themselves. The energy meant to annihilate him folded inward, consuming the ships that had launched them. Their sleek, perfect war machines collapsed into themselves, reduced to fractured remnants of light, before they even realized what had happened. The survivors, those who had hesitated, fled. For centuries, the architects had whispered legends of the Hellfire Engine, of the terrible power it contained, and now a human had become the legend. Silence followed. The Hellfire Engine was his. But now came the question Elias had refused to ask himself before. What was he going to do with it? The knowledge burned inside him. The engine was not just a weapon. It was a force of creation and destruction. It had the power to rewrite civilizations, to collapse galaxies, to bend time itself. It had been waiting for someone strong enough to wield it. Elias could hear it now, whispering in his mind, offering him possibilities beyond comprehension. He could reshape the universe. He could erase the species who had enslaved others. He could remake Earth itself. And yet, Captain. Vesper's voice cut through the chaos, soft but firm. Your crew is waiting for you. His crew. His people. For all his power, for all his ascension, the question remained. Was he still human enough to go back? The engine showed him two futures. One where he left humanity behind, where he became something more, something untethered from morality, from history, from weakness. He could rise above all species, above time itself. He could rule, and then, one where he let go, where he fought to remain Elias Voss, where he walked away, knowing that power like this would always demand more, always consume more. A god or a man. The Hellfire Engine waited. Elias closed his eyes, and then he made his choice. Kira's ship hovered at the edge of the abyss, engines flickering, shields barely holding after the assault. The crew had risked everything to bring him back, and now, as the last remnants of the architects fled into the dark, the Hellfire Engine began to collapse. Elias had chosen. He would not become its prisoner. The walls of the engine folded inward, collapsing the reality it had created. It wasn't dying. It was resetting. Preparing for the next cycle, for the next fool who would try to claim it, Elias ran. The corridors disintegrated around him, symbols burning away, the knowledge within them vanishing into the void. The engine was erasing itself, erasing him. But he had one last move to play. Vesper, interface one last time. The AI hesitated. Captain, if you synchronize again, just do it. The neural link flared. One final connection between Elias and the engine. He didn't take its power. He didn't fight for control. He burned his name into it, not as a god, not as a ruler, but as a warning. As he leapt from the final collapsing bridge of the engine's core, as Kira's ship locked onto his biosignal and pulled him into the airlock, he left one final message inside the construct, a warning written in human words, in human defiance. This machine is claimed. Humanity was here. The engine roared in fury, and then it was gone. Elias awoke to the sound of silence. The ship hummed around him. The crew stared in disbelief. Kira, eyes sharp, fists clenched, watched him like she was seeing something not quite human anymore. Because she was right. The Hellfire Engine had not left him untouched. His body still hummed with residual energy. His mind still held echoes of the machine's knowledge. He had walked away, but he would never be the same. He looked down at his hands. The scars of the engine's influence remained, golden veins flickering beneath his skin. Vesper's voice, quiet but unshaken, spoke through his implant. Captain, what are you now? Elias exhaled. That was the real question, wasn't it? Not what he had taken from the engine, but what the engine had taken from him. For the first time in history, a human had survived. And now, the universe would have to reckon with what that meant. The silence stretched between them like the void itself. Elias sat on the edge of the medical bay's metal slab, staring at his hands. They weren't normal anymore. Faint, golden veins pulsed. Beneath his skin, as if the Hellfire Engine had left something inside him. Something unfinished. Kira stood a few feet away, arms crossed, her expression unreadable. You don't look like someone who just won, she finally said. Elias flexed his fingers, feeling the residual energy thrumming in his bloodstream. He hadn't won. He had survived. The crew had seen what happened inside the engine. They had watched, as he took control, as he manipulated the very fabric of space around them, and now they weren't sure if he was still one of them. Neither was he. Vesper's voice hummed in his mind, as steady as ever. Your neural patterns remain altered. The engine's influence persists. Elias already knew that. He could feel it. Even now he sensed the remnants of the Hellfire Engine waiting inside him, like a machine that had left its imprint on his soul. Not demanding. Not controlling. Just waiting to see what he would do next. They weren't safe. The architects had fled, but they wouldn't stay gone forever. They had failed to reclaim the engine, but they weren't the kind to accept failure lightly. They would come again. And now, they had a new priority. Elias Voss. No longer just a scavenger, no longer just another human trying to scrape a living from the stars. He was something else now. Something the architects couldn't afford to ignore. Elias pushed himself up from the slab, the muscles in, his legs protesting. His body felt both too light and too heavy at once, his senses stretched in ways he couldn't yet explain. Kira's eyes followed him carefully. Are they coming for us? She asked. Elias met her gaze. Not us. She understood immediately. They weren't coming for the ship. They were coming for him. The unease was spreading. Elias could feel it in the way the crew avoided him, the way they whispered when they thought he wasn't listening. He wasn't their captain anymore. He was something they didn't understand, and he didn't blame them. They had signed up for salvage, for danger, for the unknown. But this was different. He had touched something beyond human comprehension. And no one walked away from that unchanged. Some of them wanted to leave. Kira wasn't one of them. She stood in the ship's dimly lit corridor, arms braced against the wall, studying him with the same piercing gaze she had always carried. "What are you going to do?" she asked. Elias exhaled. "I don't know." She nodded as if she had expected that answer. "You could leave," she said. "Go dark, disappear before the architects find you again." He could, but the Hellfire Engine had already made that impossible. Whatever they had done to him, it wasn't finished. He could still feel it inside him. Not controlling him, not forcing him, but influencing. A low, thrumming presence, waiting for him to decide what he was going to become. A god, a ghost, a cautionary tale. The choice was his. The message had already spread. Somewhere out in the void, the architects were regrouping, calculating. The other species that had feared the Hellfire Engine were listening. And humanity, which had never been meant to claim such power, had just rewritten the rules. Elias knew what would come next. The architects wouldn't stop. They couldn't allow a human anomaly to walk free. They had to erase him, or worse, they had to understand what he had become. He turned back toward Kira, toward the ship that had carried them through this impossible journey. The decision wasn't about whether he would fight. It was about how Elias stood at the ship's helm, watching the black expanse of space unfold before him. He could run. He could hide. He could wait until the architects made their next move, or he could go first. His fingers hovered over the console, the golden light still pulsing beneath his skin. The engine's knowledge was still in his mind, whispering secrets of the void, of technology, of war. Humanity was not ready for what he had become, but it would be. Elias Voss took a deep breath and made his decision. For the first time in history, a human had survived the Hellfire Engine. Now the universe would have to survive him. Somewhere in the void, the message was received. The architects' fractured fleet regrouped in the dead space between dying stars, their warships weaving a silent formation in the black. Survivors. Barely. They had not anticipated this. A human had done the impossible. The Hellfire Engine had been meant to consume, to assimilate all who touched it. No one had ever emerged from it intact. No species, no intelligence, not even them. And yet Elias Voss had walked away. Not untouched, not unchanged, but free. This could not be allowed to stand. Their kind had shaped the universe for millennia, setting rules, designing the architecture of power. They had spent entire eras ensuring the Hellfire Engine remained an eternal riddle, a construct beyond mortal comprehension. Now, a human had solved it, and worse, he had taken something from it, something they could not explain, something dangerous. The architects did not allow anomalies to persist. The hunt had begun. Far from the architects, far from the remnants of the battlefield, Elias sat alone in the ship's darkened observation deck. The stars stretched before him, infinite and silent. Inside him, the Hellfire Engine's echoes still burned. Not a voice, not a command, but a presence. It had let him go, or rather, it had given him a choice. The last civilizations that had touched, the engine had sought to control it, to wield it, to bend it to their will. They had failed. Elias had survived because he had done something different. He had rewritten the system, and now the system had rewritten him. He stood feeling the weight of his decision settling on his shoulders. The Hellfire Engine wasn't gone. It wasn't dead. It was waiting. Somewhere, out in the dark, there were more machines like it. More artifacts of impossible power left behind by those who came before. Humanity had stumbled onto something beyond its understanding, and Elias knew one thing with certainty. The architects weren't the only ones who would come looking for him. Some would come to kill him. Some would come to worship him, and some, the worst of them, would come to use him. The future had been rewritten. The Hellfire Engine had changed everything. Elias turned toward the control panel, his hands steady, the golden veins beneath his skin pulsing softly, almost in time with his heartbeat. For the first time, he wasn't afraid. For the first time, he wasn't running. The universe had underestimated humanity. It wouldn't make that mistake again.